Okay, so today I'm going to be talking through making French press. So to start off, I have my water preheated. I like to use 86 to 87 degrees Celsius, but boiling water works fine anyway. So what I'm going to start off by doing is turning on my scale with an empty bowl in it that I'm going to weigh out the whole beans into. And so for the contents of my French press, it tends to hold 800 milliliters of water, and so in order to make a good ratio, I'm going to do about 50 grams of coffee. Now, it doesn't have to be exact, but I do like to stay, I would say, plus or minus, and with French press, a little bit more towards minus 2 grams. So anywhere from 48 to 50 grams is fine. Here I have it set to 50. Now I'm going to take my grinder and I'm using the Encore. I have it set to about grind setting 20, 22, 24. And that's just because with mine, I've been using it for so long and I put hundreds of pounds of beans through it. So over time, the spacing starts to get a little bit wider. So I tend to set mine a little bit to a finer grind, the lower number being a finer grind. So I'm doing 24, but for most people, you can probably do just as well with like a 26 or a 28 grind, especially if you're using boiling water. Since mine's a little bit lower, playing around with that works out. So we're gonna grind this really quick. Turn the grinder on first. Sometimes a bean won't uh, get with the program and get into the grinder, so sometimes turning it off and then using the individual button will work out pretty well. So with that ground down, I'm going to take the French press, I'm going to put it onto my scale, and with that I'm going to tear the scale so that way it reads 00. And I'm going to take my coffee and let me see if I can get good lighting. And so now with that we should be able to see the size of the grinds that we're working with. So they're pretty coarse. I'm gonna take this here, tear it again just to make sure it reads 00. I like to take a large wooden spoon that can reach all the way down into there. Or not wooden spoon, but a plastic spoon. I wouldn't recommend using anything metal. Like maybe a metal knife can get the job done, but you just want to be careful when you're adding in hot water into a glass container like I have here, and stirring around with a large chunk of metal because you might end up cracking glass. If you're careful, it should be totally fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my hot water. In a lot of cases, you want to be patient and careful and slowly add your water in a spiral form, especially for drip coffee. But for what we're doing here with an immersion brew, like with French press, we can kind of get around that and be like a little bit more efficient, we'll say, by stirring with the spoon in order to mix everything up. And I think it makes a pretty great brew. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have my finger on the start for the timer. In whichever way you format, you want to do that with your phone or with a stopwatch if you have it. But we're going to be going for a total of 4 minutes. So when I start adding water, I'm going to hit the start button on the timer and we're going to go from there. So here we go. And I'm going to take my spoon and I'm going to start stirring it in there. At first it kind of is a slush type situation, but then as you add more water, it ends up stirring just fine. And so I'm gonna make sure I'm not like pouring a large amount of water in all at once, but I'm gonna be pretty patient and just add in, trickling the water over in a little bit at a time as I stir. And so with this, I'm going to be going for about 800 mils or grams in this case, because water's density is basically 1 gram per mil. We don't really need to get into like the specifics of it, but that makes the grams and the milliliters pretty interchangeable for our purposes here. So when this gets to about 700 grams added, I'm going to take the spoon out and wash it off with some of the water, and the swirling of the French press itself should be able to maintain the good mixing that we have here. So I'm about 540 grams right now. Now we've hit about 700 grams at 1 minute and 40 seconds. That isn't necessarily specific to anything, but if it helps. And now I'm going to put in the last 50 or so grams left in here. And 800. Almost on the top. Perfect. And now it's got 2 minutes left to go. So if there's going to be any video editing, it's going to start right here and go all the way until it gets to 4 minutes. And yeah. As we approach 4 minutes, I would hopefully stop the editing right here. So now we're hitting 3 minutes and 55 seconds. I'm going to take the stock, or the plunger of the French press, and lay it over top. I'd like to have the openings to the side, just in case something silly happens. It like reduces the amount that could spill. Also just keeps the gases trapped like a tiny bit more. I've also gotten 3 cups out in order to pour out all of the coffee from the French press to not leave any sitting in here. So I'm going to slowly start to depress the plunger. Shouldn't be too difficult. If you have finer ground coffee, it'll tend to produce more carbon dioxide and off-gas more aromatics, and that actually ends up creating more of a resistance for the plunger. So if you want to play around with that and seeing what kind of pressures that you can make with it, that's more than fine too. And with French press, always like no screen's gonna be perfect, and so you're gonna see like pieces, like coffee grinds, like fly up into the top. So I'm gonna press it down. I'm gonna move my scale out of the way. I'm going to take my cups that I'm going to serve into it. If you're serving to cups or thermoses, what have you, that's fine. You just want to make sure that you don't leave it in for too long. Make sure that your openings are correct. Similar to tea, because the coffee sits in the it doesn't get separated from the water, or like the coffee drink doesn't get separated from the coffee grinds. It will continue to extract larger and larger flavor molecules, which is good for more sugars and chocolatey flavors, some of the nut flavors. However, you will eventually start to extract some even larger molecules that contribute more to those bitter flavors that most people contribute the idea of like over extracted coffee, or people think it tastes burned, it's too bitter, so on and so forth. So just being careful with that is important. And that's pretty much it. I would say if you're using boiling water, maybe instead of going the full 4 minutes, you can go to 3 minutes and 30 seconds, 3 minutes and 45 seconds, play around with it. But with that, it's pretty straightforward, pretty easy to do, and in order to clean this, you would just take the plunger out, wash it in the sink, just use water. I don't recommend using soap or anything for the most part, at least for the plunger itself. If you want to, you can, and then otherwise just dump out your coffee grinds either into a compost if you have it, or wait for it to cool down and then put it into the trash. Wash that out as you would, and you're good to go. All right, hope you enjoyed.